The Indian Oil and Gas Act is a piece of Canadian legislation that governs oil and gas activity on First Nation lands.
The purpose of the Act is to provide IOGC, Indian Oil and Gas Canada, with the tools, with the means, with the rules and the authorities to manage First Nations oil and gas resources on their behalf.
There was a move at that point in time to amend and update the role of the federal government when it comes to oil and gas management on reserve. And so the federal government came to First Nations and said, we want to start Indian Oil and Gas Canada. And then First Nations got together and said, yeah, we like the idea, but we need a watchdog. We need a group of First Nations overseeing this new group called IOGC.
The Indian Resource Council required a body to help them ensure that First Nations involvement. That group is called the JTC1, Joint Technical Committee 1. The JTC1 consists of 10 to 12 First Nation oil and gas experts, along with members from the Indian Resource Council and members from Indian Oil and Gas Canada.
Our mandate is to work cohesively as a group representing our First Nations from across the country that are involved in oil and gas development on a technical level. Of course, there are our respective chiefs and councils that represent the different governance systems from across the country, but our capacity and our mandate from within JTC1 really is to work and focus on the technical level along with IOGC in updating and modernizing the regulations as they apply to the Indian Oil and Gas Act.
Well, it's really important from our perspective. IOGC has a certain view towards managing oil and gas. We have a lot of First Nation members that work at IOGC, but we don't speak for First Nations. We have their best interests at heart, but we don't speak on behalf of that First Nation. So we thought we have to get that type of knowledge and that type of perspective into the room as we develop these new Act and regulations. So it's really important that we get not only the political support through the chiefs and councils, but also the technical support. The First Nation members of the technical committee, they've seen it all. They've seen the good and the bad. They've seen industry operations that have been, a little underhanded at times. So they've seen what industry can do. So they bring that knowledge to the table and tell IOGC, we need rules that will address these circumstances. And then we work together to address it. So at the end of the day, these new rules should address all the concerns that First Nations have.
Our ongoing dialogue, communication and meetings with Indian Oil and Gas Canada, certainly those meetings do provide an opportunity for us to be able to receive, review, and respond to some of the items that are coming forward in terms of modernizing and changes to the regulations themselves. Ensuring that there's adequate timeframes to be able to review, understand, and adequately respond, of course, is very important. This is the first opportunity as First Nations that we've had to be involved hand in hand in the modernizing or development of legislation and regulations federally. And we want to ensure that we do get off on the right foot and we're able to lead by example other work that may come down the road in terms of other sectors.
The Indian Oil and Gas Act and its regulations were first enacted in 1974. So they're really outdated. Industry has changed, First Nations have changed. So there is a big push to have the Act and regulations modernized. The new modernized regulations are really going to benefit First Nations as far as drainage provisions. It's really going to limit the ability of off-reserve oil companies to drain First Nation resources from off-reserve wells. It also protects First Nations from companies sitting on land on their reserve and not drilling wells, not proving it up. So the continuance provisions are very stringent now. Companies have to prove land or they're returned back to the First Nation.
The big advantage of what we are doing is that First Nations are sitting at the table and being involved fully in this work. That gives a very important voice for First Nations. They are the people on the ground, and so they bring that perspective.
It's very humbling, allows us to influence decisions as it relates to opportunities and operations in our geographic area.
As we move ahead with IOGC, IRC, JTC1, and our First Nations, we're seeing some improvements, but really it's working forward to finding that common ground and ensuring that our resources can be effectively managed, but we're also able to invite industry partners onto our lands to be able to develop our resources. Of course, the environmental impacts are or can be long-lasting within these developments. So really, much of the assurances, I guess, that we request or demand from our First Nations perspective is to ensure that the environment is going to be able to be enjoyed by our people for future generations.